Hey, this is Josh Patrick. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code, and today my guest is Barbara Taylor from the company of Taylor and Taylor. I've known Barbara for, gosh, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that, maybe longer. Um, Barbara, and Barbara is the person who was responsible for me being a blogger at the New York Times, which maybe we'll get into, but probably not. She decided to give up her job, and she graciously paved the way for me to step in behind her. But we're not going to talk about how you get on the become a blogger for New York Times. Today, we're going to be talking about the mergers and acquisition world and why I believe, and hopefully Barbara might agree with that, this is a great time to be buying a business. So let's bring Barbara on. Hey, Barbara, how are you today?
I'm great, Josh. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. And you and I have been talking about mergers and acquisition and what's the best way to position companies to sell for a long time. But unfortunately, it's kind of hard to position a company to sell today. Would you say that makes sense?
Yeah, I think everyone's in a wait and see mode for a number of different reasons, but I think everything's on hold largely when it comes to sellers selling a business. And, we need to see how businesses are going to um, manage right now in the midst of this pandemic. And then I think we're going to have to see some amount of recovery as well to see how do they bounce back, how do they recover from this, do they go back to normal, how long does that take, is there a new normal? So I think there's going to have to be some period of time, and I think that'll be different depending on your business and your industry, to just kind of see where the dust settles.
So just to let everyone know this, today is April 10th when we're recording this. You're probably listening to this in June or July. And for those who are on YouTube, we're broadcasting direct to YouTube right now. So because it's tough to sell your business, you kind of have to do some disaster scenario planning to keep your nose above water. And we've been talking about that a lot here recently. But I also think that for businesses that have put together, strong cash positions, have emergency funds, have access to lines of credit, this is not a death-defying incident necessarily. And if you're in that sort of position, and it kind of appears to me that it's probably one of the best times you're ever going to come across to buy businesses. So, if you're a buyer or you're in a position to be a buyer, what kind of recommendation do you have for those folks?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think in some circumstances, this is going to be a really good time to buy a business. We just finished up a fantastic seller's market, which basically was ended by this pandemic. And it was, I mean, not just a good seller's market, it was a great seller's market for probably at least the last 2 or 3 years, maybe more like 4 or 5 years. And I think that's, you can probably basically sort of put the a, a marker in when this pandemic started, and that's when that seller's market ended. So valuations were high, valuation multiples were high, and I don't think that's going to be the case going forward, unless you're maybe in one of these categories of business, the lucky few that's doing really well as a result of this. But I think that one of the things that I don't think you can compare this to the Great Recession because it's different on a lot of different levels. But I do remember in the midst of that whole thing, a lot of business owners saying, um, I don't ever want to have to live through something like this again. It's just too stressful. And so I'll be interested to see if business owner sentiment is similar in this regard, with this pandemic, with business owners feeling like, you know, even if I weather the storm and things are okay, I'm really open to some other scenarios right now as far as getting out of ownership, taking chips off the table. This is pretty terrifying for a lot of business owners. So you might find a lot of business owners right now sort of adjusting their expectations about selling and leaving, maybe wanting to move that date up, maybe being open to some more creative exit scenarios, especially with people that are in their industry. So I think you might be right in certain instances. Yeah,
Yeah, my own belief is this is not going to be a decision that's going to be left in the owner's hands.
for some.
My
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think for a lot. I mean,
yeah,
and obviously it depends on the industry, but even if, let's say, you're a construction company or you're a service provider of stuff for your people, like when we have a security company that we do business with, if and they happen to be well capitalized, so they're going to do fine through this whole thing. But I know that some of their competitors are not well capitalized, and they're not going to be able to get into.
sorry.
They're not going to be able to get into their um, into their customers' offices or customers' houses. They don't want them around, and their cash flow is going to dry up enough where they're going to say, if I don't find some way to someone to buy my assets out at a really reduced price, I'm going to have some real economic pain that I don't want to live through.
Hmm.
And those folks will end up going from being business owners to employees again because they're not going to have enough money to get out of their business to retire. And frankly, most businesses, when they're sold, if they don't have other things, they're going to end up going back to work for somebody else because they're not going to have enough money to retire anyhow. Even in good situations, that happens. But in this situation, my suspicion is that there's going to be a lot of businesses out there that may not want to get out of business, but there really isn't any other option other than bankruptcy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think business owners are going to have to sort of accept that reality if they are in that position, like you said, where they're not well capitalized, they don't have the wherewithal to be able to survive this. It sort of is what it is. And I think that people are going to have to be really realistic about their options, and maybe have to forget about some goals that they had for selling, before this, as far as having a nest egg or something to add to the nest egg and retire and all that, and just think more along the lines of the continuity of the business and keeping their employees employed and being able to, somehow pay off some debt. Or like you said, I think that it's going to be a point in time where business owners are really going to have to reset their expectations if they're in that situation, and um, be realistic about what's important and be grateful for, if you, hey, to your point, I think there's going to be a lot of business owners suffering. And if you are in a position where somebody's going to scoop you up or integrate you into their operations, you know, that's great. Because I think there's going to be some businesses that won't even have that option.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So if you're advising somebody, a business comes to you and says, Barbara, I want you to help find me some businesses to buy. What are you going to be telling them?
Mhm. Well, um, this is my general advice, and I'm not sure that it's any different now than it ever is. And I think that the business buyers have to have a lot of tools in their toolbox in terms of being able to locate a target. So, yes, there are the public business for sale websites, which, there's this 80% of the businesses on there are garbage and 10 or 20% are really good. But, there are those types of listings, and you should watch them as a buyer. But really, the best buyers tend to be very well connected. Um, I would say your two sources in terms of referrals of businesses to acquire would be CPAs first and foremost. Um, that tends to be a trusted advisor that every business owner has. And when you're talking about these types of situations with selling or exiting or a liquidity event, they always think two things. What am I going to get, and how much do I pay in taxes? Or they're thinking in terms of, the financial piece of it. The first person they think of to call is not their attorney, it's their CPA. So a CPA is a great resource if you're looking to buy a business. And I would say the second resource is typically a financial planner or somebody in your position who's having these conversations with the business owner about their complete financial picture. And to a lesser extent, attorneys and bankers, as far as referral sources for finding a target to acquire. But I would say CPAs, financial planners, and for better or for worse, a lot of those public databases, you're just going to have to be really patient and weed through a lot of junk to get to the good stuff.
So would it make sense for an acquirer to hire somebody like you to help them find acquisition targets?
Yeah, I would look for somebody who's a buy side specialist. My firm doesn't do a lot of that. We do help buyers who have identified a target, but actually doing a search is a very, very time consuming um, proposition. So, but there are people in the M&A world who specialize in buy side searches. And so I would look for somebody like that. And certainly they have a network that that's one of the reasons you're going to hire them is they have an extended network of all kinds of buyers, especially if you can find people who specialize in a certain industry or maybe a handful of industries.
So how do you find somebody who's a buy side? I mean, do they list themselves as buy side um, M&A people, or
Yeah,
do you,
this
do you
is
do do you do a Google search to find them, or just start calling people in the phone book?
the phone book. What's that? Um, Google search. Yes. Basically, you can be looking for any M&A firm will talk about typically. Do they do buy side? Do they do sell side? Do they do both? So if you're just looking for M&A firms in general, make sure it's clear what side they help. Um, you can do a Google search on something like, buy a business, buyer representation, buy side representation. And that's another area where you may want to call a few, if you have a good network of CPAs and attorneys, ask, do you know of somebody who does M&A searches for the buy side?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about calling CPAs, but it would make sense to do that. And by the way, in this particular market that we're in, I would be also not afraid to call banks. And the reason I would not be afraid to call banks is because you're going to see a lot of loans go into default, which means the banks are start going to get into the workout realm. And they would be very, very anxious and very happy to see a lot of these clients get absorbed by other companies with the hope that they're going to get a higher recovery rate on the loans than if the guy just goes out of business or a woman just goes out of business.
Yeah, and the extent to which you can be specific about that when you're a buyer. Like I get a lot of emails from private equity in particular, also search funds, and just people who are looking for a business to buy. But whoever it is you're communicating with, the more specific you can be, the better. Especially with regard to like how quickly you can move to get a deal closed, what kind of equity you have to inject, or what size check you can write, what industries, especially if you have operational expertise, what industries you're looking for. Um, I really, again, just general advice to anyone buying a business is be specific, and you can get a lot of lessons. Whatever you may or may not think about private equity, they are professional business buyers, and they do a lot of things really well. And so it's not a bad thing to imitate a lot of what they do. And they're very specific about all of it, who they are, what they're looking for. And so the more specific you can be, the better. And the more you can appear like a serious buyer. Nobody wants to work with a looky loo, I think at any given time. So definitely, if you're doing some digital outreach, whether that's email or you're using LinkedIn to message people, um, you know, write up your one sheeter, your tear sheet, your description of who you are, why you're qualified, how fast you can move, and what you're looking for.
That's good advice. So, what kind of things should they be doing as they're going through the process of buying the business in today's environment versus before coronavirus? Would there be anything different you would be recommending to a buyer today than you would have recommended back before the virus became reality in our life?
Oh, that's a good question. And I'm not sure that that there's a new set of rules for buying businesses based on this pandemic. I think a lot of the basics still apply. I think it's going to be really important. It's always important to remember that this is an emotional event for a seller. Um, Now you're talking about this is, you know, a devastating event for a seller. And as a buyer, to try and be sensitive to that, to be patient, to be ready for there to be a lot of stress. Um, and, you know, or maybe not. I mean, maybe somebody's going to be really grateful that you've stepped in and you're going to, again, you know, scoop up the business and employees are still going to have jobs. But I think that now more than ever, buyers are going to have to be really sensitive to just the stress levels always high in M&A. You're probably going to even ratchet that up another notch.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think something else is going to change also is that, you know, when times were good and businesses were selling at high multiples, it was because there were multiple buyers coming to the table for every deal and they were bidding the price up. I don't think you're going to see that now. I think that if you can find a buyer, if you're listening to this podcast and you say, I need to get out of business, it's going to be likely finding a buyer, not a multitude of buyers. So your strategy as a seller is not going to pit one buyer against another. I think the buyer that comes to the table is likely the buyer you're going to have to dance with.
I think that is a very good point. I think you're absolutely right. In different times, there are all kinds of sayings about one buyer is no buyers, and you have to get competition. And I think you're right. I think that's probably going to be the case. And you know, hopefully, it's somebody with operational expertise, whether they're a competitor or somebody that you know from your industry, but somebody who also has some sort of operational expertise that's going to help fix this problem. Because, you know, there's just going to be so many businesses that before this I would call distressed, which to me, buying and selling, but buying distressed businesses is sort of a specialty for a lot of people. And so not only do you have to be able to buy them well, but then you have to be able to get in there and you know, fix whatever the
Yeah.
problem is.
Yeah, and if you're in a position where you need to sell your business, um, it's not a bad thing to start calling all your competitors and say, will you buy me?
Sure.
Because the truth is, in this particular environment, uh, unless I'm getting all cash or I'm getting cashed out of all my debt and I'm not going to be on the hook for anything, I'm not selling my business to somebody who doesn't have operational expertise and is a strategic buyer. And for those who are listening, a strategic buyer is somebody in your industry who's just going to take your operation and fold it into theirs. It's not a separate thing altogether. It seems to me that this is really a strategic buying sort of time in our life.
Yeah, I agree. It's much easier. Um, should be very, very straightforward.
Yeah, those folks know your industry, they know how to run the company. They're likely not going to take your office staff or your overhead staff, but they'll take your direct providers because they're going to need at least some of them.
Hmm.
And if your business is down by 30, 40, 50%, realize that it's really kind of a, well, gee, do I get more money by liquidating my business or do I get more money by selling my business? And you're likely to get a little bit more money by selling your business. And there's a good chance you'll be able to negotiate with your bank to get them off your back to say, here's my choice. I go bankrupt and you get nothing, or you let me off the hook and we do this transaction.
Yeah, I agree. I think everybody's going to have to negotiate a lot more and be a lot more creative in this environment.
Yeah, it's just one of the, it's the rule. I mean, and I've been writing a lot. I've been doing a bunch of videos recently around this situation. And I've been talking about scenario planning. And if the scenario is bad, you have to take all the rules that you thought exist and throw them out the window.
Hmm.
For example, if you want to stay in business and you're going to have a really hard time getting enough cash to do so, well, you need to be calling your creditors up and saying, look, I can't afford to pay you now, but I will term this over 2 or 3 years and I'll let you secure the note. So that can buy you some time. But if you want to sell your business, you still have to be thinking the same way. And you have to be teaching the seller how to work with their creditors as you're going through the buying process. So, a thought just occurred to me. One of the people you might be wanting to put on your team, if you're on the buying side, is to find a turnaround consultant to work with you.
Mhm.
And the reason is turnaround consultants will do things that normal business owners would never think of doing. And they just do it as just a regular way of keeping a business alive and running. And frankly, the turnaround consultant knows how to talk to the bank when they have to. And we're in one of these positions where workout is going to be a common thing, not an uncommon thing. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, it does, and I agree with you. That is a very specialized expertise, and I think that is probably a good idea to have somebody that's got some experience doing that. Because, like you said, the business owner probably isn't even thinking about certain options that a turnaround specialist would go ahead and pursue.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I've ever really done as especially, but something I know how to do is I had to do it with my own business more than once. And what you learn when you're looking at the wall is that that wall really isn't there. It's just a bunch of things you think are rules, which really aren't rules.
Mhm.
So that's sort of how you do that. So Barbara, you guys focus mostly on buy side. Do you see any opportunity for buying right? I mean, for selling businesses right now that are not distressed sales?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about this as businesses kind of falling into, I guess, four different categories. So would have one category that's kind of the ones that we're talking about here that are either they've already gone out of business, or they're weeks or months away. They're in this distressed situation, and I think that a lot of the options that we're talking about today are good for those types of businesses. After that, I would say you have businesses that um, they're going to take a big hit from this, but they're going to recover, and the recovery may take months or years, but they're going to make it. Um, After that, I'd say there's a category of businesses that's actually not going to feel a lot of impact. In fact, things might be up a little or things might be down a little, but they're going to weather it fairly well. And then again, as I've mentioned, there'll be kind of a small percentage of businesses that for them this is some kind of windfall because they help set up home offices, or whatever, they're in some industry where this is a windfall for them. So I think there will be some businesses that come out of this that are um, really battle tested, and they have proven that the businesses, it's tough, it's resilient, it's possibly recession proof, or whatever you want to call it. But this is an amazing test for a lot of businesses, and there are a lot of them that are going to come out of this looking very, very strong and capable and resilient. And the type of business that buyers are always looking for a business that um, doesn't have a lot of risk associated with it. And so certainly a business that can survive a pandemic, I would say, has less risk than clearly one that can't, or one that has trouble with it. So I think there will be some categories of businesses that come out of this looking really, really good, really strong. Now, back to what we were saying, I don't know that multiples in general are going to be as high as they were. So you might have to settle for valuations that aren't as sky high as they used to be. But your business may be in a good position, or even one of these businesses that recovers and shows, hey, we recovered from this thing. So I think there will be some businesses that are positioned to sell. I don't see anybody having trouble buying businesses, at least not right now. During the Great Recession, the problem with selling a business was it was hard to find buyers, and because banks weren't lending, and they certainly weren't lending to anybody that had anything to do with small business. So as long as there's still access to capital, um, I still see lots of very active buyers even right now. So I don't think there's going to be a lack of buyers. And I do think that there are some businesses that are going to have a very compelling story to tell when this is over.
Cool. So, Barbara, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. So, if somebody wanted to find you guys, how would they go about doing so?
Well, the name of our company is Allen Taylor and Company, and our website is allentaylor.co. We're a .co, not a .com. And Allen is ALLAN. Taylor.co. And I am on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. So pretty much everywhere in the digital
Cool.
universe.
Cool. And I have an offer for you, which you might be interested in, especially now. For years, I've been talking about becoming financially free from your business. And I've used this tool on a piece of, on a yellow pad, which I've called the 4 boxes of financial independence. I made it into a little quiz. It's now a widget, which is online, and it'll take you all of 7 minutes to find out whether you're on the road to financial freedom from your business or not. And to get there, you just go to thecashflowcode.com. That's thecashflowcode.com. You click on the big orange button and you put some information in, and 7 minutes later, you're going to find out whether you're on the road to financial freedom from your business or not. If you're not, there's certain things you need to be doing. And if you are, you might be able to take advantage of some stuff that you're not. So, at any rate, this is Josh Patrick here with Barbara Taylor. We're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here real